Market to Market is everywhere you are. Subscribe to Market on YouTube, find us on the PBS video app to stream on demand, and add our 3 podcasts on your favorite podcasting app.
Do you still get worried about?
Well, the real big concern is when you've got a pretty seismic weather event in the Gulf of Mexico right when our harvest season is coming online. So you've got all of this volume that soybean farmers and grain farmers are producing. You've got robust demand, particularly international. But then you've got this area of the country called the Lower Mississippi River that accounts for 61% of U.S. soybean exports, 58% of corn exports, by far the #1 launching point for both commodities. And so all of a sudden, if you have a disruption at that area, supply and demand can't connect, and they just look at each other, and the transaction will never occur. So that's the real concern, particularly as hurricane season can certainly extend into the fall when our harvest comes online and our export program really elevates.
Severity is one thing. Is there a location from a grain belt perspective that causes more concern than another?
Well, you just look at our launching points for these commodities like soybeans, which is the #1 ag export from the United States. So you look at the Lower Mississippi River, which is #1. We've got 14 soybean and grain export facilities that are located along that stretch of the river from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, past New Orleans into the Gulf of Mexico. So unfortunately, that's also an area that's suspect for hurricane activity, so you can have these kind of disruptions. It is clearly that the profitability of farmers in the Midwest is so strongly linked to how functional our export capacity is on the Lower Mississippi River. So it's very important for someone like me to be well acquainted with it. So even before the hurricane hit, the big concerns that I had are, yes, the facilities themselves, the storage facilities, but it's the conveyance system that links the storage facilities that ultimately is used for loading an ocean vessel. That's the more fragile elements of these export facilities that are along the Lower Mississippi River.
It's just not cheap to do either. And that's the hard thing to remember, whether I'm writing a check to a check-off, which is lobbying on behalf of a certain bill, or maybe I'm having a premium cut off of my grain sold so that we can expand. It's just someone has to eventually pay for it if we're going to continue to use it.
When it comes to actually paying for it, it is expensive, but that makes it more incumbent upon us to make sure that we're articulating the cost benefit. So there's the cost side, how big of a check you have to write to build a new road, bridge, lock, whatever it may be. But there are benefits to that, and that is the competitiveness of the American farmer and all of the ripple effects that result from that. You know, one of the things I like to underscore is some industries create the ripple effect, other industries ride the ripple effect. And I think the best example of an industry that's like the stone getting dropped into a pond of water that creates the ripple effect is farming. And you think about it, it's not an accident that we've got all of these industries in the state of Iowa that flourish and exist in the first place because there's a group of farmers that plant a seed in the spring and they harvest it in the fall. And because that activity occurs, there's all these other industries like rural lending, manufacturing, seed technology, all of these industries that would not exist if it wasn't for the farmer. So that's all part of that story we need to tell, that yes, infrastructure is expensive, but the benefits exceed that, and that's why it merits our attention.
Did Ida highlight the biggest vulnerability, and that's the Port of New Orleans, or is there another one that we need to worry about even more?
It really highlighted, because so much volume goes out of that area, how seismic the problem would be if you had wholesale disruption there. Hurricane Katrina presented that to us 16 years ago. You know, there were farmers in the Midwest that all of a sudden saw the price that they were offered at point of sale in the middle of the country, 1,000 miles from New Orleans. All of a sudden their price declined, not because their supply had diminished in quality and not because there was no longer demand, but just all of a sudden the supply chain wasn't operating as it normally would be. And the whole phenomenon with agriculture is you've got these barge loading facilities on the inland waterway system like the Mississippi River, And if these facilities can't move product out their back door because, say, the port of South Louisiana is closed by New Orleans, then those facilities will not be willing to accept product via their front door because they can't move it out. And so what they do is they'll drop the price that they offer to farmers. And so, you know, my mind immediately turns when you see these export regions close, or say even the same phenomenon can happen is if you have an unexpected closure at a lock on the inland waterway system, is all of a sudden that translates to less money in a farmer's wallet. So it has real relevance to an individual farmer.
What's the biggest priority in the next 6 months for you?
Well, it's, you know, all of the above is kind of a scapegoat kind of question, but it really is true. You know, when you look at the journey from the farm to the ultimate customer internationally, it's comprised of a number of links. And you're always only as strong as your weakest link. And so there are challenges with our rural road and bridge inventory, our inland waterway system, our ports. You know, I always try to keep in mind that if your supply chain, if each link in your supply chain is made out of stainless steel, but only one of them is made out of a twisty tie, then you don't have an effective supply chain, even if most of the links are strong. So you have to be attentive to each of those links in the supply chain. So for us to do our job appropriately, we're going to be very attentive to rural roads and bridges and the inland waterway system and our ports. And the moment we focus disproportionately on one, then the danger is that one of those other links could become the twisty tie, and then you don't have an effective supply chain.
All right, Mike Steenhoek, appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for having me.
This is just part of the conversation with Mike Steenhoek. More can be found Tuesday with the MTOM podcast in both video and audio form. Subscribe and follow today to catch the full interview.